Okay, it's Thursday, March the 20th, 1997. My name is Doug Horn. I'm here with Jeremy Gunn from the Review Board, and we're interviewing Audrey Bell in Vernon, Texas. Can we start by asking you to just review for us your professional qualifications and a brief career summary?
I was the supervisor. I'm a registered nurse in the state of Texas, and I was the supervisor of operating rooms and recovery rooms at Parkland Memorial Hospital at the time of the assassination. Since then, I took over the operating and recovery rooms and day surgery at Children's Medical Center in Dallas, and I retired from that facility February of 1989.
1989, okay. And you've been in Vernon since when?
Moved back to Vernon in 89. And I'm a graduate of the old Parkland Hospital School of Nursing. I graduated in 1946.
Okay. So you were at Parkland for many years.
Yes, I've only been at Parkland and Children's. I was at Parkland until about 1966, I believe. I moved over to Children's. They were building a new hospital adjacent to Parkland. Children's was. They were down on Welborn. And I went over and finished with the construction of that facility and then opened that operating room. I like construction. I moved Parkland from the old Parkland down on Maple Avenue to where it is now, the original building. And we did some expansion over there. Then when Children's was building a new facility, I went over there. Got a little bit late for what I really wanted to do, but because it's, no changes, well, somewhat. But anyway, after we'd been there for a while, we did enlarge the operating rooms and build 4 extra large operating rooms, primarily for transplant surgery, neurosurgery, and that sort of stuff for children. And I finished up there helping to design the new ICU, cardiac catheterization lab, the new tower that went up. Well, we finished the main construction, then I said somebody else can have the rest of it now.
So you witnessed a lot of progress.
Yes, but they were good because Children's put a nurse in charge of everything that related to patient care, and I was that liaison with the rest of the people in the hospital. So I got a hold of an experience that very few people in nursing have an opportunity to do.
Thank you. Can we move on next to November 22nd, 1963? And let me ask you, how did you first hear about the assassination or the wounding of the president that day, and what did you first observe in trauma room?
Okay, I was in the dining room. Dr. Jenkins and I had just gotten our tray and sat down when they started paging Dr. Shire's staff. And I looked over at him, and I said, Dr. Shires is out of town. But he had had a big case a couple of days before, and I was afraid something had gone wrong. Dr. Jenkins had been out of town and had just gotten back. And about that, when they started the second one, Dr. Jenkins started to take, or one of us started to get up and take the page teleoperator. He was down in Galveston. When Dr. Jones, one of the senior residents across the way, came by the table and he said, I'll take the call. Now, we were sitting, like the telephone bank was just over here a few feet, and we were sitting on the table very close to it. Dr. Jones hung up the phone very rapidly, came back, placed his hands on the table, then the table. He said, the president's been shot. He's on the way to the emergency room. I think we both looked up and said, you're kidding. He said, I'm not. And so he went on to tell the other doctors that he was with about what was going on, because it was surgery crew. Chief sitting over there. And Pepper and I both picked up our tray, and he said, I'll go get an anesthesia table. And I said, well, I think I better get to the emergency room. The reason I had the impulse to get to the emergency room is the emergency room supervisor had been on vacation. I still am not sure. I don't think she was there that day. But every day, I would check on the girls down in the emergency room, see if they needed anything. That was a good crew down there. And just anything I could help them administratively was what I was interested in. So that was the reason my first impression was get down to that emergency room.
Who was this supervisor who had been on vacation?
Doris Nelson.
Oh, okay.
Doris got there that day. I think she was at home and she heard it and she came in, thank goodness. But anyway, we went to the elevator, and their stairway downstairs was right next to it. And I think Dr. Jenkins, I'm not sure whether he walked or took the elevator, but I know that I didn't take the elevator. I don't think it was even on that floor, so he probably walked. I walked down to the emergency room through the stairway, which went through the X-ray department. Now, I was not in scrubs at this time. I was supposed to have gone downtown earlier in the day to have a meeting at the office with Mr. Smith and the crew, because we were planning to bring the National Association of Operating Room Nurses to Dallas in February. And I was going downtown, but that got canceled around 12:15, so I was still in street clothes. I went in through the back door of the emergency room from the X-ray, and the first person I saw was one of the administrators. And he did double take because I was in street clothes, and he said, "Oh, Audrey, glad you're here." He said, "Go see what's going on." It's at room number 1. So I went into the emergency room, and they had already brought the president in at that time. He was on the thing. Some of the doctors were trying to get cut downs. Dr. Jenkins got down right away, and they got an endotracheal tube down, and everybody was working. The nurses, there were at least three, might have been 4 emergency room nurses in there, and 3 or 4 doctors in there.
Should we take a break?
Yes.
We're back on the record. Go ahead.
They were also setting up to do a tracheostomy. And Dr. Perry was going to do that. And when I took the first look, I could recognize the president. But I didn't see an injury because there was no injury around his face. And I said, "Well, where's the injury?" And Dr. Perry was standing there, and he reached up to on the president's head and just pulled up a little bit, turned his head to the left a little, and there was a gaping hole, and that's where the brain and fluids were dripping out. And I don't know, it could have been 3 or 4 inches that I saw.
In diameter?
In diameter, yeah. And one of they were wanting to start an IV on the right arm, and I remember getting my scissors, or getting a pair of scissors, and cutting the president's shirt up the seam. See, one of the things we'd always been taught on our trauma patients was to try not to destroy the clothes on any of them that were there. We always cut up the seam or something in case the patient needed it later. But I remember cutting up the seam, and I looked at the wound, and they were working. They had started to do the tracheostomy, and the nurses from the emergency room were there, and I thought, I've got to get upstairs. I've got to call and get an operating room set up. So I went outside, and by that time we had loads of people. FBI, Secret Service, Dallas Police, County, the Sheriff's Department, the Governor's Guards. See, the Texas Rangers were there. And every phone I could spot had somebody on it. And then I spotted a small corner office. It had no sign on it. And I opened the door, and sure enough, there wasn't anyone there. So I got in there, closed the door right quick so that I'd have the phone. And I called the OR and told them that we need to set up for neurosurgery for the president.
And the OR was on what floor?
It was on the second floor, and we were down on the ground floor. And went back out and started toward room 1 when I heard this voice say, "What room is he in?" And someone said, "Number 2. I thought, who else? This was Dr. Shaw, head of the thoracic surgery department. So I just followed them in. And there was the governor. And you could see they had put chest tubes in and they were working. You could tell that there was a chest wound. And I asked one of the residents, I said, "Anything else besides chest wound?" He said, "Yes, we've got an orthopedic injury. We've got a fractured wrist and there may be some leg work." So I thought, well, I better get that room set up. So I started back out to my room and I met Dr. Clark going into OR number 1. Well, I made my phone call upstairs to get a room set up for the governor. And I said, "I'll be up there shortly." And as I was coming back out, well, Dr. Clark was back out in the hallway, and I said, "We have a room ready for the president anytime you're ready to go or need it." He said, "We won't need it." He said, "The president's dead." So I went on back to OR number 2. I was just around the corner from all of them. And I signaled to anesthesia that was in there. I said, "Come up whenever you want. They're setting up." He said, "Okay."
And where were they setting up for Governor Connolly's surgery? What floor?
The second floor.
Also the second floor?
Yeah. The operating suite's on second.
Thank you.
So I went on back upstairs. I get somebody on this. It's a self-operating elevator. I said, "Get somebody on this elevator with the key and control it. Only those who have to go to third floor, which was delivery, or second floor, which was surgery." I said, "Only those that need it." And I said, we're going to be transferring the governor shortly." And so I went on up, and they did get an operator on that elevator back there. But anyway, I went in. I had to get out of the clothes. I was in street clothes. So I went in and changed clothes right quick and came back out, and they were, about that time, they were bringing the governor up. And we had some problems. One of the governor's aides just had to see him, and he was having an argument with one of my nurses out in the hall. He said, "I've got to go," and he was in street clothes. And she was telling him he could not go into the operating room in street clothes. I came up and I heard what was going on, and I said, "You'll have to change clothes if you want to go back in the OR. You cannot go that way." He said, "I've got to talk to the governor." I said, "Well, go in yonder." And I sent him Audrey in with him to change his clothes if he had to go see the governor, which was fine, and he did.
Did you know his name?
Aide, it was his chief aide that was with him. Okay, one of them that was in charge of the party. I don't remember the name. Because then I got all the governor's party up, including Miss Connolly, Homer Garrison, who was in charge of the Texas Rangers, everybody. But we got the governor up and they started operating him. And I was acting really as liaison because I had my nurses and all back in the room. And other surgeries were being canceled. The patients, unless it was an emergency, didn't want to have surgery. I mean, when they heard what was going on. So they were clearing out, and there was some confusion. We were finishing cases, and they were moving into the recovery room trying to take care of them. We set up the anesthesia department, Dr. Jenkins' office, for Miss Connolly and her party, and had an open line to Austin. And they were trying to find the kids, get hold of them, see what about them. We got telephone service in shortly, along about this time. First, it just went out. Everybody was using phones. And I began getting a lot of calls from people wanting to know other hospitals in town saying they had rooms for the governor, and I kept saying we're not going to be moving the governor to another hospital. Administration was getting the same calls and wanting to know why I was telling them we were not going to move him. And I said, Dr. Shaw's not going to move the governor across town. I don't care. I said, he's going to be here, so y'all might as well get the rooms fixed up around here, whatever you need to be. See, Parkland at that time had no private rooms. And the only place they had any private room was in my recovery room. So I said, he's going to be in recovery. Well, we had some there. But anyway, Dr. Shires came up about the same time that the governor's children got there. And I was so glad to see him. He got dressed, and I had Dr. Gregory and Dr. Shaw back in the operating room. Well, I went back, and I knew that we had to take care of the fragments. When I went back there, the scrub nurse said, I've got fragments on my table.
Just so to put fragments in Governor Connolly.
From Governor Connolly, that they had taken out of the arm and the leg. And I said, well, I better take them. So she handed them, they were in a little, what we call glass medicine cup, and she handed them off to me. And I went out and filled out the envelope that we fill for foreign bodies, and completed it. And one of the, I don't know whether it was FBI or Secret Service. I'm still unclear onto that to this day, but it was one of them was in my office by this time, and he took the fragments, and I had him sign for them. And that slip that he signed for was given to administration later on that afternoon. And I did not go back down to the emergency room after we got the governor up there, because I knew there was nothing I could do. And my focus at that time had to shift to taking care of the governor and getting him set up.
That's a good summary of a busy day. Can we cover 3 specific areas now as separate subjects that you've already glossed over? That you've already summarized? I'd like to talk about the president's throat wound and head wound, and then we'll talk about Connolly fragments last. About how long do you think that you were in trauma room? How many minutes would you estimate?
Oh, probably kind of hard to tell, but I guess a couple of 3 minutes maybe. I'm really not sure. Time just really flies, and I did not look at the clock on the wall when I was in there, but it couldn't have been over 3 minutes. It could have been even less, probably 2, but just long enough to look at the wound, cut the shirt. I think I did turn on the oxygen, but those are things that you do so rapidly that it doesn't take too much time. And
then is it correct that after you left trauma room 1, you did not re-enter?
I did not go back, no. Ms. Kennedy was in there, and I think about that time I went in that somebody put her in a chair just outside the hall.
Did you observe a wound on the anterior neck of the president?
They were getting ready to, they were setting up the trach to put through. I just know that there was a wound area there, and that they were getting ready to do the trach through the wound in the neck.
Did you know that because of talk between the doctors, or because one of them announced it, or did you just observe that they were...
Well, they were setting up a trach, and they were getting ready to go through, and somebody might have said, we're going through the wound.
You could understand by observing the tools they were using in the setup?
Well, that is just natural, too. Whenever you've got a wound in the neck, in that area, and you've got to do it, and you have to put the trach in, which you have to so they can breathe, you go through or try to utilize that. Had it been off to the side of the neck, it would have been different. They would have had to have closed that one and put one in. But the trach tube just curves down into the trachea.
I see. So if someone asked you to describe the president's anterior neck wound, say before the tracheostomy, would you be able to do that from your own independent recollection?
No, because the tray was there, and they were prepping around it and draping, and you know, these things happen so quickly. Like Oswald, just to give you an idea of how fast things can move. 9 minutes after he hit that emergency room.
On Sunday the 24th.
Yes. We made the incision in surgery. And he had 3 cut downs and a chest tube in, had been intubated, had been prepped and draped and ready for the surgeons to make. So when you're talking about a time span where everybody just works in concert and it moves very, very rapidly.
A team concept, right?
It is. It's very much a team because Parkland was a trauma hospital.
Okay. Thank you. Would you describe for me, using the most precise medical terminology that you can use, the President's the location?
Okay, let's see. It was on the right rear. I think it's called the parietal area.
We can go off the record. Doorbell. Okay, we're back on the record. Before I ask you to describe the President's head wound, would you tell me where you were standing when you were observed in relation to the cart?
Oh, I was at the head of the table. I was at his head whenever Dr. I believe it was Perry shifted his head. He was laying straight back.
Supine.
Because with the trach they had to, and he shifted the head a little bit to the left and lifted up the kind of the matted area, the flap. There was a little bit of some flap, and you could see the hole, and there was brain and spinal fluid dripping down out of it. And then I noticed it was dripping, down into a bucket.
Anatomically, describe that for me. You were about to anatomically describe it in terms of medical terms.
Well, let's see. The occipital is at the back. So to me, it was the right occipital area. Now, whether it went any farther than that, I didn't take time. I did not put on gloves and examine the wound. I just observed it visually.
I see. If I was to ask you this, was the wound located above the right ear, or forward of the right ear, or behind the right ear?
I would say it was more behind the right ear, kind of maybe level and down. It was not above the right ear.
Did the upper margin of that defect, would you say that was above the highest part of the ear, or?
I don't know whether I saw the entire defect or not.
Okay.
I just saw the big hole back here in the back.
Okay. Did you see any other wounds on the President's head besides the one you just described?
No.
Okay.
And there were no facial wounds.
Okay.
Just the neck wound and the back of the head.
Okay. What at the top of the head?
The top of the head?
The superior portion.
Oh, he looked very nourishing here.
Okay.
On the top of the head.
Okay.
When you walked in the room and took a look, you could tell it was the President on the table. And that's the reason I had to ask, where was the wound?
I'm sorry, Frank. You were standing near the President's head, behind him, looking down from his head towards his feet, and his head was flat on the gurney, but you couldn't see the wound while the head was resting on the gurney.
That's right. I was actually kind of his feet were toward the door, and I was on his right side. I came around on that side of the table, and I was just standing there right about the head area, above the shoulders and the head there. And that's when I asked, where is the wound?
About how many inches or feet were you away from the head at the time that you saw it?
Foot.
Okay.
I was right at the head of the table.
Do you have any opinion as to what type of brain tissue you saw?
I did not. All I know is it was brain tissue. whether it was the cerebellum or the cerebrum or what. I did not go into that.
Okay. We would like to ask you, if you don't mind, we're going to give you 4 excerpts from Grant's Anatomy, and if you don't mind, ask you to render your best recollection of the head wound you saw that day. And on some of these, you may end up not marking some of these if you didn't see anything on that portion of the body. I have a blue pen here, which probably contrasts nicely with the... So Bell Exhibit 1 here is the front of the skull, and if you want to make marks on that, you can, and if there's no need, then you don't need to.
I didn't see, there wasn't anything on the front of his head.
All right, here's a right lateral view. Yeah. Here's a right lateral view, which I'll call Bell Exhibit 2. And I'll give you the pen. Following that, we'll show you a rear view.
Well, it would have been kind of back here behind a little bit more if this is just straight lateral here, because he lifted a flap, and how far up the wound went, I do not know.
Okay.
I just know that what I saw basically was in the back of the head.
Okay, here's Bell Exhibit 3 is a posterior view, which might be better for this purpose.
Let's see. This will be the...
This is the rear of the skull.
Yeah, this will be the right side here.
Yes, ma'am.
The wound that I saw basically was, I thought, was in this area here. I don't know how far it really went over to the right side, but I just know that it seemed like this basically is where that the material was dripping from.
Okay. If you feel comfortable with Bell Exhibit 4, I would ask you to represent what part of the brain that would have corresponded to, if you feel comfortable marking that drawing.
Well, say it would have to come down into this lower section, but I'm not... it looks like it. To me, it would probably be somewhere like that, but I would say that's very unscientific.
It's an approximation.
Be very much an approximation, because I didn't really stay and examine it that long. When I saw the massive wound injury, I knew that if he was going to get the surgery, we had to put everything in motion very, very rapidly. And so I did not stay and do any discussion with the doctors about the extent of the injury, how bad it was. My main focus then was to get an operating room ready and get a crew set up so that Dr. Clark wanted to bring him up to we'd have everything in readiness in the OR.
Just to clarify here, you've already stated that the President's face was clear.
Yes.
Did you observe any damage to the right temple or the left temple?
But just at the back of the head.
Okay. And when you said that, you just placed your hand on the posterior part of your skull behind your ears.
Yes.
To try to clarify what you said. When you observed the defect in the President's skull, is it completely absent? How would you...
There was some scalp down there because it was raised up so I could see. Now, how far... we didn't... I didn't see that. He didn't pull it back down. You know, it was just up.
We would like to ask you some questions now.
Glass that was just standard in the operating room, but it was glass and not metal.
Did you see them placed in the glass, or they were just sitting there all day?
No, they had been placed in the glass while I was out of the room. I imagine Dr. Audrey was the one who placed them in the glass.
Do you remember the names of the nurses that were assisting him?
Oh, no, I haven't thought of those names in so many years.
Do you remember how many fragments there were?
There were between 3 and 5. I really think there were about 4. They were in varying sizes.
Was anything done to measure them before you
No,
transferred?
we did not measure them. That is one of the things that we always relied upon the pathologist to measure fragments, and that was part of our policy, is to get them down to the pathologist. And we had a foreign body envelope that we put these things in.
And who filled out the foreign body envelope?
I did.
You did. Okay. Can you describe about how big that envelope was, the dimensions more or less?
Oh, it's the one I used that day was standard envelope size. What is it, 3.5 by 5, or it was about that size. It was a brown manila envelope.
All right.
When you say standard size, is it standard letter size?
Standard. They're small letter size.
Oh, small letter.
Not the
long one.
Not the long one, but the standard. It was about the
okay. And manila
envelope. Printed on the outside in black.
Is that a Parkland form or state of Texas form?
Parkland. Okay. Could have been Dallas County, because I believe they were in charge of the laboratory at that time.
Can you revisit with me one more time your best recollection of who you gave this to?
It was either someone from the Secret Service or the FBI, and I'm not sure. And I gave them to one individual who signed for them.
Okay.
There could have been 2 of them, and probably were 2 of them, one standing in the doorway and one in my office.
What is it that makes you think that it was the Secret Service or the FBI? Is there anything special?
Yeah, I think they identified themselves, but I just don't. I know it wasn't to the Dallas Police or the County Sheriffs or the Texas Rangers.
Okay.
So it had to be. I feel it had to be a federal, because they were in street clothes. They were not in uniform.
Okay. And you said there was a receipt executed. Did you say that?
Yes, they signed for it.
Did you sign the receipt also?
Yes. And that went to administration.
To administration at Parkland?
At Parkland that day later.
That would have been,
all of our papers, everything we had up there.
So that would have been done in Mr. Price's office?
That's right. That's how that they knew that I had done them, because when I went back over on Saturday, some of the doctors were there, and then they called me. And I know Secret Service was down there. No. Yeah, I believe Secret Service was in the office that morning. And they were tracking the who all had handled them and where the fragments had come from. They were just getting the chain.
That morning would be the next Saturday the 23rd. Did you speak to any government officials Saturday about what had happened to the fragments? Did anyone speak to you?
Yes, in administration.
On Saturday?
On Saturday.
And do you remember which agency they were from? Which federal agency?
I don't know, but I thought it was Secret Service, but I'm not sure. It could have been both of them.
Okay. I'm going to show you a document and ask you to read it. It's dated, and I'll leave these with you. Keep them. It's dated November 23rd, and it's a one-page FBI report. And if you just read that, I'll then ask you a question or two about it.
You didn't want me to read that loud.
Oh, no. No. Okay, I'm back on the record now, and Audrey Bell is completing the reading of the FBI document.
Wait, you identified the document?
Once again, it's dated November 23rd, 1963. It's an FD 302 form, and it records an interview of Miss Audrey Bell on November 23rd. It is record number 1801009010270. It's an HSCA record, agency file number 0000919. Okay, do you have any comments about whether this matches your recollection?
But number one, this is just speaking of a single fragment. They're not using a plural, and there were more than one fragment. There were, I would say, between 3 and 5, maybe 4. And they were in different configurations.
When you say that, do you mean different shapes? Or?
Yes, in different shapes.
But they were in
all
the same
shape.
envelope, though?
They were all in the same envelope because they had been removed from the governor's body.
Is there anything else about that report that you would want to comment on?
I don't remember, unless it was the Texas State Trooper that was in out of uniform. It was not a uniformed officer that I gave them to.
Okay.
And I did get the receipt. And my file, I do not have any files that contain a copy of this receipt because everything was turned in to administration.
Okay.
This was before the great days of the copying machine, and you didn't copy everything. We didn't have a facility. I don't remember stating that there. I said, we do that we didn't get all the fragments because there were still small fragments in Governor Connolly's leg and arm. So we knew we did. I can't imagine making that one. I don't remember anything about the small flesh wound or penetration of the skin by the same object in the governor's left eye either. Or that's a groin. There's a left eye down there.
And someone has crossed it out and put thigh.
Left eye.
Right. How do you read?
Well, I think they did work on the thigh.
More clarifying questions. Do you remember what color the fragments were?
Well, they were a metal color. Let's see. They weren't bright, they weren't dark, but they were, I would say, it kind of looked like a dark, maybe it's stainless. No, well, they weren't bright like stainless steel. And they weren't real dark
Were they silver or gray or copper? Three choices there.
I would say that they probably were more grayish.
Okay.
I'm not sure. After all these years, I think they're the first ones to ever ask me the color of them.
Okay.
If I ask you just a couple of questions on this. Do you remember speaking with an FBI agent who was taking notes shortly after the assassination?
Well, the next morning, down in the administrator's office, they were recording. They had set out on the coffee table, and there were some agents there. See, the doctors had just left when I went down.
On Saturday?
On a Saturday. So we were in the administrator's office, and there were some people there. And they had been in earlier that morning. I guess it was getting close to noon by the time that I went down.
Okay. Were you ever shown any copy of their notes or what they wrote down from that conversation?
No.
Is this the first time you've seen this
That's
document?
the first time I received that one.
How would you comment on the general accuracy of this two-paragraph document? It seems substantially accurate, or you've mentioned that you...
Well, I gave them the fragments, and we were in my office in the operating room at the time. They were signed for. They were in the envelope when I gave them to them. And I don't recall this instruction from the governor's office to identify, but that doesn't mean somebody couldn't have stuck their head in there and said something about it. Basically, at this time, I thought they'd probably go down to our own lab. That's where they'd end up. That's where our fragments went. But this gentleman said that he would take him, and I thought that he was from the FBI or the Secret Service.
And that's the
I'm
person...
not sure, the administrator's office. And even whether the same people stayed in there all the time or not.
Okay. I'm about to show you another document. It is a photocopied excerpt from the Warren Report, Volume 17, page 841. And I'm going to ask you to look at the top half of this page, Mission Exhibit 842, which is a photographic copy of a foreign body envelope and ask you if you've ever seen that before.
Notice this has got an S on it. It says bullet fragments.
I see. I see that too.
Right arm. That's corrected. Rutherford Schrader. That would have been. They were orthopedic. They were. I couldn't imagine not putting an S on it if I had more than one fragment.
Do you believe that you filled out anything on that envelope yourself in your writing, in your handwriting?
Oh, I know I filled it out. I can tell it's my writing.
If I can ask just a clarifying question, is this the type of form that the envelope that you were talking about? And this is the one with a photocopy of what appears to you to be the one that you filled out on November 22nd?
Yes. My printing in there.
At the bottom half of the envelope, there are many initials. Do you see your initials anywhere around it?
No. I see my name over here, and that's...
yes.
But...
on the line that says nurses.
I don't see my initial on that.
I have another version of this photocopy on a letter from the House Assassinations Committee, which they mailed to you on March 18th, document number 000. That part of the envelope that had been covered by a commission exhibit is now uncovered. And I wanted to ask you, what's the meaning of this phrase, unit number?
Every patient that comes into the hospital has a unit number, and that follows them. For any admission, any future admission, and that keeps all their records together.
Okay. Sex and race is self-explanatory, and the other entry looks like it might have been age, but I can't really read it. Can you tell me what that word might have been?
It probably was. Yeah, age, sex, and race.
Do you know what this number is on the right-hand margin, 1176-something?
No.
Would that have been something you would have entered, or perhaps someone else?
No, that would not have been. It's on this one, then. No.
Okay.
We would not have pathologist or
Okay.
to someone else.
Going back to this Warren Commission, and it contains some material. Now, first of all, is the foreign body envelope in this photograph, is this life-size or smaller or bigger than life-size? This envelope here.
The envelope is about 3.5 foot here, a little bit, and there would have been a little bit of space at the top. You see, your copy here doesn't show Dallas County Hospital District on it. And there would have been some space above it.
The reason I ask that is it appears that this was photographed next to this container with some material in it. My next question for you is, these are described, the contents of the Connolly fragment material, is that?
That would not have been. It's on this one, then. No.
Okay.
We would not have. We did not enter anything except the unit number for the patient.
Okay.
Any other numbers would have been added by the pathologist or to someone else.
Going back to this Warren Commission, volume 17, excerpt from page 841, on the right-hand side of this page, they have shown a container, a transparent container, which looks like it might have been plastic. And it contains some material. Now, first of all, is the foreign body envelope in this photograph, is this life-size or smaller or bigger than life-size? This envelope here.
The envelope is about 3.5 by 5 inches.
So this might be smaller then?
It would be, the actual envelope would have probably been just, it's about that size. Might have been just a little bit longer. They cut off the top of it here a little bit, and there would have been a little bit of space at the top. You see, your copy here doesn't show Dallas County Hospital District on it. And there would have been some space above it.
The reason I ask that is it appears that this was photographed next to this container with some material in it. my next question for you is, these
it?
are described, the contents of this container, Commission Exhibit 842, are described by the Warren Commission as being the Connolly fragment material. Is that? Okay, we've turned the tape over, and let me repeat the question for the record. On page 841 of volume 17 of the Warren Commission, at the top half of the page, there's a photograph of Commission Exhibit 842, a container with some material in it, and my question is, does this material in this photograph, is that consistent with your recollection of the fragment material that you gave to the official on Friday the 22nd?
Well, no, it doesn't seem to be all there. Now, this is
supposed to be from the President's brain, the bottom half.
Oh, really?
So you should, it's supposed to be. That's what that's supposed to be.
It looks like a tin cotton. No, there was more than one fragment. We had a fragment about this size or larger. That's on the bottom part there.
Okay, you're pointing at the photograph at the bottom of the page, which is labeled 843. And go ahead.
And there could have been one about the size of the other fragment to the left here, but there was also an odd sized one that kind of curved and went. It was longer than it was wide.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So just that one fragment. There had to be. I know there were three. There could have been four.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were small, like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost. That's not even as large as a pellet. Looks like.
When you say like that, which are you pointing to?
Oh, this one.
At the top.
That's not even as large as a pellet out of a shotgun.
The one to the far right?
Yes.
On 842.
And it's kind of hard to tell what the rest of that is. It looks like that's just photocopy.
Those other tiny dust-like images, they are in the book that we copied this from, so they appear to be part of the photographic image, but they're very, very tiny. It is unclear what they are, but they're not the product of our Xerox machine. Okay, I'm now going to show you another document. This is, let me ask you this. Do you remember meeting with anyone from the House Assassinations Committee?
Yes. They came to Dallas in 70-something, 78, I think, 76. I never did see what they wrote up. They did do an interview, and but I never did see the report of the interview. They were going to send me a copy, but I never did get it.
I'm about to show you document HSCA document 180100090100271, file number 000920. This is the transcript of their interview with you, and I'd like you to read this, and we'll go off the record and then ask you for your comments. Okay, we're back on the record, and Audrey Bell has just had a chance to read the transcript of the March 12, 1977 interview with the HSCA. Had you ever seen this before?
I have not seen this interview, no.
Does it match your recollections of that event?
As well as I can remember. This was 20 years ago. We did this one afternoon after.
Yes, ma'am. 20 years ago. Do you? Is there anything about it that seems incorrect to you?
I think basically it is correct. I just don't see the drawing that I did on that day. But
do you remember doing the drawing?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I think I had to do it twice. I got the bottom of the medicine glass too big at once. It's small.
Okay.
Let's say like a shot glass.
Okay. I'm going to show you yet another document. It's a letter that's addressed to you. It's dated a few days after this event. It's dated March 18th, 77, from the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And I'd like to ask you, record number 1801009010268, file number 0009119. I'd like to ask you, did you ever receive this letter from them?
I don't recall this letter.
Okay. This is the one which has attached to it another Xerox copy of the foreign body envelope, which I referred to earlier in this interview. I mistakenly said at that time they sent it to you. What I should say correctly is that we have photocopies of this letter in the House Assassination Committee files. We do not have in their files any correspondence back from you, which is what they asked for in the letter. They asked you to comment on the envelope. We did not have an answer back from you to them. So we wondered if you had received it.
I do not recall receiving this letter. In fact, I don't recall ever hearing from them again after this original recording. They had said that they were going to send me a transcript, but I never did receive it.
Okay, so we can keep that.
It's a little bit late, but it's not enough to you.
20 years later, the government comes to it. We have a little bit of a mystery we're trying to clarify here and resolve. What I would like to do is read to you an excerpt from a memo written by one of our staff members, Mr. Joe Freeman, who wrote this memo on April 26, 1996. And it concerns Connolly fragments, and it concerns the subject of your transmission of them to another person. And if you may, I'd like to read a paragraph from it, and I'll let you read it if you'd like. Ask for your comments. Mr. Freeman writes, he discusses the foreign body envelope, which he found in this letter that we just showed you. And then he says, Bell, after consulting with one or more members of Governor Connolly's staff, President Parkland, turned the envelope containing the fragments over to Texas State Trooper Bobby M. Nolan. There is a receipt for this transaction written in handwriting which appears to be the same as that on the envelope, i.e. it appears to be Audrey Bell's handwriting. On the receipt, as opposed to the envelope, the term fragment, singular, is used in describing the envelope's contents, as opposed to the plural version of the noun on the envelope. The receipt is written on an office memorandum from, and in the to category, Bell writes what appears to be, quote, Lieutenant Alexander on the top line, Crime Lab on the second line, end quote. Bell and Nolan each signed the receipt, which is dated 11/22/63. Nolan also initialed the envelope itself.
Well, Lieutenant Alexander was with the Dallas Crime Lab. Or we had a Lieutenant Alexander that we worked with down there. I don't think he was up there that day.
Okay. Have you ever met Bobby Nolan, Texas State Trooper Bobby Nolan, that's referred to?
I could have met him. I just don't recognize who he is at this time. I had so many from the Texas Trooper's office there because they were the ones guarding the governor.
The governor. Were they normally in uniform or not?
Yeah, they were in uniform. The ones that I recall were in uniform. That's the reason I don't think that is correct. Mm-hmm. You know, that kind of ties into, there was a newspaper report out in Dallas, somebody, and I think it was with the Texas State Department, said that they had a handful of those fragments themselves. This came out in Dallas Times-Herald, and that they were, he pulled them out of his pocket accidentally. I don't think he ever said that he knew how they got there, that they were from the governor's room, And I know I had a call from TV that day and everything else wanting to know, because I think, it's been on record many times that I held the fragments and had turned them over to, and at that time there was one of the TV guys, news guys living in our apartment complex there who called me first about it.
This event you're describing, was this possibly the same year that the House Committee spoke to you?
I don't know. It could have been. It was along in about that time, I think.
Do you remember the name of that trooper involved in that incident? Was it this name, Bobby Nolan, or was it different?
It could have been Bobby Nolan. I don't know whether it was him or whether it was someone else. But there was a big play in Dallas for at least 24 hours about somebody else having those fragments.
And the media interviewed you?
And the media, I think it was Channel 4.
Did that other individual who said he had fragments call you?
No. We had no contact.
Okay. Mr. Freeman, when he wrote this, I think he's basing his account on, he cited this receipt. He's no longer with the staff. We'll be looking for the procedures so we'll get back. But he based this on the receipt. He was trying to piece this together. Did you ever meet any state troopers that were not in uniform in your whole time at the hospital?
Not that I'm aware of. I think even Colonel Garrison always wore a uniform.
Can I try a couple of questions? Do you remember talking to Mr. Alexander at all about any fragments or having any discussions with him?
Our crime lab, Alexander?
Yes.
I'm just trying to recall. That could have been the other person, because I was going to give them to him, and he said it was okay to go ahead and give them. That could have been that second individual in the room. But basically, no, it's the first time I've ever thought about talking to Lieutenant Alexander about the fragments. Because they never got down to him. Normally, I would have taken them down to him.
Do you remember any other documents or memoranda about the fragments or describing the transfer of them, such as a handwritten memorandum talking about transfer, or anything else other than the envelope that you've already...
I had the envelope, and the individual signed. I wrote on there something about the foreign body envelope containing the fragments being given to...
And you're talking about the receipt now. There was an envelope and there was a separate receipt.
Yes. They had to sign for them. It was on the Dallas County Hospital District Memorandum. I remember it was one of the red ones, the red memos that we had.
Okay.
And it was about a half of an 8.5 by 11 page. That standard, page. That memo page. And he signed it for me, and then that went to administration that afternoon.
Meaning that you sent it down to administration?
I took it down.
You took it down. Okay.
And that was in your handwriting?
It was in my handwriting, yes. Because when we signed for Oswald's, when Dr. Shaw was in the office, I identified the Oswald bullet. That's my ID on it.
Why don't you tell us about that, about what happened on Sunday?
But Dr. Shaw was in there about this foreign bodies.
I'm sorry.
And he came in the office about the time I was getting ready to deliver it, and I think that had to go to the Dallas Police Department. That one did. And he said, I'll co-sign that with you. He said, we all went through such a hard time Saturday about the other fragments.
Oh.
So, see, he was in the operating room, so, they wanted to know, and he said, I'll co-sign that it has been delivered.
Did he say anything more about the problems with the other fragments?
No.
And what did you understand him to be referring to?
Well, see, in a case, any case, you have to have a line, and the fragments had gone from Dr. Gregory Prophet to the scrub nurse's table to me, and I had delivered them to someone else. You've got to establish this line to the point that when Dr. Shires removed the bullet out of Oswald, on Sunday, all of a sudden I was on the side of the room and I heard him yell, "Audrey," and I said, "Yes." He said, "Take this bullet. I don't want another person to handle it between you and me." And that again was back to the chain of command, the chain of custody.
You wanted to minimize the chain of custody.
Yes, and it went directly from the surgeon to me. He didn't even put it on the scrub table. He handed that bullet directly to me. I identified it on the end with AB. And then when I took it to the office to fix the hard body envelope, and Dr. Shaw, I guess had been in the operating room, he came in right behind it. He said, "I'll co-sign that receipt. I'll sign as a witness to that receipt that who you gave this to." And again, that receipt went down Sunday afternoon to administration. I did not keep any of those papers in the OR.
Typically, what happens with the papers once they have gone to administration? Does the administration keep a copy of them? Does the administration give them to the police and keep a record?
I would think that administration would keep a copy and probably give the original to whichever one of the investigating bodies was taking care of it. I mean, I would assume that they would get the originals and we'd just have a copy in the administrator's office. That was my understanding. Everything was to go down there so that there would be one receiving place.
I have a question about the memo paper itself. You said it was red. Was the letterhead red, or all the paper?
No, it was white with red lettering.
Red lettering.
Red printing on it.
The header was red lettering.
Yeah. Yes. I think it was Dallas County Hospital District Memorandum or something like that. And to and from. And
all right. Just briefly, to complete the record of, because you've alluded to it twice now, could you describe your events, your involvement in the events of Sunday, just briefly?
Oh, briefly. Okay, I was home when I heard it, and I got to the hospital before they got there with Oswald. So I was able to change clothes and get down to the emergency room when Oswald arrived. On the way down, we had accrued surgery, some minor surgery, and I pulled the staff out of the room and let the residents finish their case, and they started setting up. They had heard it, and circulating nurse had been trying. We had very limited staff that day. It was on Sunday. And so I went back to help her get set up. And there were two of us, and she was the senior circulating nurse. She and I were doing the circulating for that room that day. She was staying in the room practically all the time. I was doing a lot of running in and out, getting things. Because we had such a problem with all of the security. We had the Dallas Police, the Sheriff's Department, the FBI, I think we still had Secret Service, and we had Texas Rangers. You'll have to understand that in the OR, we had an elevator up from the emergency room. And there was, even though this was an all-restricted area, a part of a hallway so that they could get back into the other part was classified as a non-sterile area, so that people in street clothes and what have you could get back to the dressing rooms. Because this came up where it came up just off to the left was operating room number 2, which is where we set up for Oswald that day. Just slightly to the right was operating room number 3, and if you just went around the corner, that's where the office area was. So kind of went around, and I had all these people in this non-sterile area encroaching onto the other side of the hall at times, which got to be a real problem.
During the surgery?
Well, they all got up there some way because they were security people or policemen or sheriff's deputies, what have you. They came in the front door, but they migrated to the back. And I didn't have anyone in the office because we didn't have a secretary on Sundays. And anybody going by would just grab the phone as they could if you had time to answer it. I had called downstairs and asked the nursing office to see if they could find me another supervisor that could get up there, because I needed somebody with authority. All of my doctors that were available were in with Oswald, even the anesthesia. So, see, we still had a lot of troopers and all around because I still had the governor in the recovery room. And we still had Miss Conley up there.
All on the second floor?
All on the second floor, confined.
So
it was the only place within the hospital that didn't have outside windows.
So were you present during all of the surgery on Oswald, or just part of it when
I was in and out for the whole thing.
The whole thing, in and out for the whole thing.
From the emergency room on up. In fact, Dr. Shires and I rode up in the elevator together. And I had already changed clothes, and he started undressing in the elevator. And he grabbed a suit. And later that day, after I'd gone down the stairs and was coming back in, I heard a voice. I was trying to be identified because we had people. It didn't matter who you were. IDs didn't count. Somebody on the inside had to identify you to get back in. And they changed guards on the front door when I'd gone to administration. And he said, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to have somebody. I'm in scrubs, jacket, everything. About that time, Dr. Shires walked out of the recovery room where the governor was, and he said, oh, there you are. Where are my clothes? I said, in my office. The guard said, well, I guess you belong here, don't you? Dr. Shires said, yes, she belongs here. But that was the type of security we had that day. No one came in and out.
Did you ever write any reports for Parkland Hospital or for any other body on the events of that weekend, for federal government or for the hospital?
No. I don't recall any. Just verbal. And, of course, the circulating nurses made out records, operating room records for the surgeries that they were involved in.
I see.
And I'm sure that administration got copies of those, because that's the people who were involved on the cases.
Did any federal government personnel interview you on Sunday as they had on Saturday?
No.
Did you discuss the assassination or the events at Parkland with any other medical personnel that weekend? When I say the weekend, I include Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Well, I'm sure we talked about it some among the staff up there, and I certainly had to. Okay. I certainly had to talk to my staff in the recovery room, and even from administration about setting up for the governor and what the accommodations were going to be. I talked with administration about that, as well as my staff. When I say administration, I'm talking of nursing administration as well as the hospital administration. But there wasn't any official. It was just talk. Oh, I had to see what we were going to do about the cases that were scheduled for Monday, which we canceled. We canceled everything out except for the emergencies that had to be done.
Did the trauma room 1 or trauma room 2 personnel talk about the wounds that on the patients they had treated with each other that weekend?
I do not know. I don't think there was probably much talking, because there might have been some talking among themselves, because we all know that you really can't discuss what all happened. I mean, the privacy of an individual, and it's just not ingrained in most of us to talk about it. I don't remember giving detailed reports even to my own family about it. You know, they knew I was involved. But you just don't talk about that. But can I just say one thing about the tracheostomy again?
Please.
Saturday morning when I got over there, Dr. Perry came up to the office. And he looked like pure hell. Of course, he had been, primary until Dr. Clark came down in with the president. And he sat down in the chair and I said, "You look awful. Did you get any sleep last night?" And he said, "Well, not too much between the calls from Bethesda that came in during the night." I said, "What about?" He said, whether that was an entrance wound or an exit wound in the throat, he said they were wanting me to change my mind, that it was an entrance wound.
Do you recall what time of day this was?
Well, it had to be in the morning hours.
That he spoke to you?
Mm-hmm. Because he left the hospital, I think, later that afternoon.
Would this have occurred before you met with the federal officials about
Sure.
Before that?
I believe so, because I didn't meet with them until about noon, and then I went to a press conference that was being held that afternoon, and then I went home. And I was over there that morning while I was doing some of my work.
Did he say who had called, whether it was a doctor or FBI?
He didn't say that. He just commented, and we never discussed it any further. But I had just commented that he looked like hell, because he did. He took a tremendous blow with all this.
In what way did he take a blow?
Well, he was working on the president. Actually, late Friday afternoon, he came to the office and he sat down in a chair and he said, "I've always wanted to see the president, but I never thought it would be under these conditions." I mean, it really hit him hard that he was down there working on the president. He was the chief person in the room originally, and having to make decisions about what they were going to do, kind of directing the others, doing the trach, all that sort of stuff. In situations like that, I'm sure you're aware, you just have to, all of a sudden, you just have to put everything behind you and do what you have to do. Like when Oswald came in, just before he arrived at the emergency room, all the doctors practically were back in. Some of them were on the road home. They made U-turns in the middle of the road and came back. We were all down there when they rolled them in. And somebody that must have been a first-year resident said, "What are we going to do?" One of the others looked up and said, "The same thing you do for every gunshot wound that comes in. Just stay with the routine." And that's it. You've got to stay with the routine to do things like this. And it hits you later. As far as Oswald, after he died, we did have to keep him in the operating room for a while until we got released from the FBI. I think they were having to get Miss Oswald and the kids, and they wanted to secure them, or they were en route or something. But we probably kept, I don't know, it might have been 30 minutes, it might have been an hour, but we kept him after they determined that there wasn't anything else we could do. He just bled to death. His wound was so massive. That aorta was torn up.
Is there anything that we haven't covered? Anything else that you would like to, that you think we should address? That you observed or that you saw?
Offhand, I really can't think of anything else. Because I really didn't observe, I was just in with the president for a short period of time, focused in on the governor. And then, of course, for the next several days, that was the big thing that I took care of. We were taking care of the governor.
That's right, you were the supervisor of operating and recovery rooms.
That's right. And see, we had to keep the governor in the recovery room until they could fix a secure room out on the floors. Because all the rooms faced Harry Hines Boulevard. and there were rooftops across the way. At that time, we really didn't know what was going on still. So we had to keep him until they could put lead shields. Colonel Garrison ordered lead shields on all the windows. There was a couple of rooms. One of them that was his colony. They put this colony in, and one of them was the governor was in. And we got him out in time for Walter Cronkite's interview on, is it Tuesday? I think it was Tuesday night. Walter Cronkite interviewed the governor. Dr. Gregory and I were standing back behind the cameras.
Is this the Tuesday after the assassination?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
With a cart for an emergency if we had to, but he interviewed the governor. But we were there with him. It was on for the 6 o'clock news, I guess, or what have you. If
we can find a receipt, the receipt that you alluded to that you signed for transfer of the foreign body envelope, the Connolly fragments, may we contact you and ask you by mail and ask you if you can recognize it?
Sure.
We will be looking for that. Because
there are 2 receipts. One for the fragments and one for Oswald's bullet.
Right. Thank you.
Could I try a question for you on back to Commission Exhibit 842?
842.
Down at the bottom third, there are several different initials. Can you identify any of those of who they are? Maybe starting in the top left, one in the darkest handwriting.
I don't see any there that I recognize. A lot of them look like doctors writing, okay.
There's one.
BMN, I have no idea who that would be. CG. Now, the only thing that if that's not, is that a CG, that's a CJ, isn't it, or a J?
What's this?
Right here.
This is a Q9, we believe.
Q9.
It's a number the FBI uses.
Oh, I was looking to see if that could have been Charles Gregory.
Well,
if they had showed it to him, the next day.
We think it's Q9. Maybe it's something else.
That's the only one that I could offhand put anything with, and I was going with, like C.F. Gregory. He didn't use the F routinely, like at that time I didn't use the N that distinctive. If that could be the CG, but that doesn't really look like it. So.
Have you seen other envelopes of this sort with many initials on it?
No. We rarely ever see an envelope once we've delivered it to the crime lab.
So
they sign for it. We sign it in another book, not even on the envelope. And
so then, from standard practice, those would not likely be doctors or nurses.
No,
initials.
no,
Okay.
There wouldn't be anyone from that I'm aware of. It'd be somebody further on down the line. Even in the crime lab, we took the specimen and foreign body down. We signed it in their book with our name and description, and they signed it, recognized it. So we didn't do additional writing on that unless we had something about the foreign body we wanted to put on there. And Oswald's may have had down here in the bottom. It probably should have that. I had identified, had my marking on the bullet, and with what it looked like.
Did you mark the Oswald bullet yourself?
Yeah, I marked it myself.
Okay.
And put it in the envelope. And it has my marking on it, which would have been something about like, if you get it, something that it would have had a mark. Just about like that.
An A, capital A-B?
Capital A-B. If you look at it real closely, that's an A, an N, and a B.
I see. And you scratch that into the metal?
Yeah. It's not the tip, but the opposite end, the head of the bullet. Yeah. Because we don't mark bullets along the side.
Okay.
It has to be marked on the head. So that. Yes, the forensic lab, the crime lab, very explicit. I think I had the only people in the hospital that ever got to tour Crown Lab. And our people down there, then they included the emergency room later, but how to mark, how to handle foreign bodies. They gave talks to the operating room nurses of Dallas about how to handle foreign bodies, bullets, knife blades, all that sort of stuff, so that they were usable.
Well, thank you for sharing your best recollections with us today. And it's been 33 and a half years now. It's been a long time.
I'm sorry that, some of these things have just kind of escaped me, and I can't be any more specific about them, but I'll try to be as specific as what I recall.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.